Hi everybody, welcome to episode number 12 of Conversation with Angie and Mike. Today we're talking to Peter Wells, who works in a business that he started back in 1986 called Polyvine, which is based in Cheddar, and we're going to talk to him a little bit about the history of why and how he started the business. Hope you enjoy.
Oh my gosh,
Wow. Tea lady.
This is very fast. I'll have to come here again.
You're more than welcome. My son's studio.
Right.
So he's a music producer and DJ, and we use his kit. Or we use his studio. To be honest, we're a bit naughty with it because we keep forgetting to work out when he's here and when he's not here. I did say to him the other day, we should get him on the podcast. And then if we get him on the podcast, and I said, but how are we going to do that? Because we use your studio?
Yeah.
So we need to work it out. Hello.
Hi. Yes.
So, Peter, is your phone off?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful.
Is yours off?
Mine's off,
Is
yeah.
your computer on?
Everything's on, it's all good.
Silent.
Actually, what I will do just quickly is because I've had so much trouble with this, it just switched off. I'll leave it out
You
there.
do it. You do that. Good idea.
The right position of
I
the
haven't
camera.
had. That's right with me.
Oh, is there a camera as well?
There is a camera as well,
there.
yeah.
Oh, right.
Camera.
Oh, right, on the thing.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure you've seen, if you have a look at our website, they over the time, they film me all sorts of things. It doesn't mean to say I know much about it, but I haven't really had
I'm not sure you want to own the fact that people are filming you, Peter. It sounds a bit dodgy.
They don't anymore. I mean, I think I was emergency for a long time because there wasn't anyone else, but now we hire people. Of course, it's such a
paid actors and actresses.
Oh yes, it's such a difference when you look at our website now, or compared with a few years ago. Of course, they just appear and outpours this absolutely perfect whatever. Sorry,
it's okay. I was going to introduce you, Peter, because Angie has no idea what you're talking about.
Oh, so come on,
and nor will our listeners.
Oh, right.
So, Peter, give us. So I've been warned by Peter's son that he can talk for England. So just to remind you, we've got an hour, and we're going to talk, hopefully, about a little bit of your life because it's really interesting. I've only heard small parts of the story. So, Peter Wells, Angie Clark.
Hello. Hi.
So, what do you do, and why would you be interesting?
Well, it's probably best to start from the beginning because how did I get where I was? Well, funnily enough, I went to a very posh school, QEH in Bristol, Queen Elizabeth's Hospital. I'm never too sure how I got there because apparently I passed the entrance exam, but it was very good. And I left school and without, I think like so many people, without really any idea of what I was going to do. And I ended up applying for training in electronics at the British Aircraft Corporation because I was born in Bristol.
Yeah.
And everyone went to the British Aircraft Corporation.
Like everybody went to Westlands in Weston-super-Mare, didn't they?
Oh, right. And I was incredibly lucky because I started there and they kind of allocate you. It's like the army, you start these have huge numbers of trainees. And I arrived and they said, you're allocated to the guided weapons section.
Nice.
And although it had not much to do with my later life, it was absolutely fascinating. And we built the Bristol Bloodhound guided missile, which is actually now you can see if you go past the helicopter museum at Weston. Yeah, and you look in off the road there. There's a missile stuck in there, and that's what we built.
Oh, I'm glad I finally know what that is. I drive past that every day, and I've always wondered what on earth is that.
Well, it was based on the German V1. It's a ramjet engine, very very simple, just a paraffin ramjet engine, and it had solid fuel boosters, because once you get up to a certain speed, the air passing through the jet sucks in the paraffin and it works by itself, basically. Very simple thing to do.
Wow.
But I worked on that for about 4 years, I think, and we went off test firing it. We dragged the things. Oh, well, I didn't personally, but I went in the lorries that were dragging these things, and we fired them off into various bays and seas around the UK. I really enjoyed it, and then they brought in all sorts of new guided missiles, which I was working on, and I might very well have been there now. Suppose I don't know. Uh, but then Howard Wilson came to power, and the Labour Party cancelled everything. They cancelled all the UK defence things like TSR2 and these kind of things. And I said to myself, well, I can't see my future here because everything wound down very, very fast. And I thought my future must lie somewhere else. And I'd always been interested in chemistry because I did chemistry at school, and I applied for a job in laminated plastics, and I went first of all into a company in Bristol. And laminated plastics are also involved in adhesives, so it got me involved in adhesives. And I was approached by an adhesive company to go and work for them. That was up in London. And then I went to an exhibition with this company, and I met a guy there who was in construction adhesives, a company called F-E-B in Manchester. Unfortunately, they don't exist anymore. It was a marvellous company. So I went to work for them in Manchester, and basically, that was the very quick way that I got into what I'm doing now, because I got quite involved in adhesives, the furniture industry, and of course the furniture industry in the UK in those days. And we're now up to about the early 70s. The furniture industry was huge. South Wales, also I used to go all over the country, but certainly South Wales, Midlands, North, huge furniture companies making furniture for all over Europe and for America as well. And then, and as I said, I worked for this FEB company. Who are another story in their own rights, actually. But the amazing thing about it was I did very, very well and got quite a good job. I was technical research director, and we were involved in all the early building chemical products, polyurethanes, polyethylene, all sorts of chemical things. And that was very interesting as well. I went over to Switzerland, I went over to America, traveled quite a lot. But all this was in its infancy. Now it's in every builder's merchants and so forth. You'll find, but it was in its infancy. And just as I thought we were going to set the world on fire, because we were doing huge amounts of business in the Middle East. That was the time when the Middle East was exploding. They were building all the huge towns and motorways and everything in Saudi Arabia and so forth. And I went to a board meeting one day, and they said, "Oh, we got some good news for you." I said, "Oh, what's that?" They said, "Well, we've been offered £36 million." This was 19. By this time, we're up to about 83, I think it was. We've been offered £36 million for the company. So I said, "Oh, right." They said, by Tarmac Construction. So I said, "Oh." So off I went. So I went home and I said to my wife, I said, "I don't want to work for Tarmac Construction." So she said, "Well, at that time, I'd just begun a big research project with FEB involved in the first water-based coatings." And I said to my wife, I said, "I could go and do that by myself." So I went to see the company, and they were incredibly good. It's a family company. They gave me the car, they gave me a year's consultancy, all sorts of things, which enabled me to leave. And we bought some old buildings, and I started my experimentations, and that basically led to the company that exists now, which is called Polyvine, because we were sat at the the dining room table one day, my wife and myself, and we just bought an old farmhouse, and it was called Vine House. And so we said, well, we're going to be working in polymers, and this is called Vine House, so we'll call it Polyvine.
Oh, I see.
And that was how it came about. And funnily enough, this farmhouse had some industrial buildings attached to it. This was at Rockhampton in Gloucestershire, and they produced, of all things, they produced Bibles. They had a printing press there, and they
Wow.
printed Bibles.
Wow.
Because Rockhampton was only a tiny little. It's still there.
Where is it?
In Gloucestershire. It's
the top bit or the bottom bit?
It's about 5 miles north of Thornbury. It's quite near Thornbury.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
But it's got a big Plymouth Brethren religious house in it.
Okay.
And it's a very religious place. So I think that was how the Bible printing came about. So we had some buildings to start work. And if you come to our new factory now and you walk into our new laboratories, on the wall is you'll have to come and have a look. On the wall there's a big photograph, and that was the one I took of I had a wooden shack in the field. And that was where I developed the first products that we used, and luckily I took a photograph, and so that's hung off in the thing.
So where are you based now?
We went from Sharpness, we went to Thornbury in Gloucestershire, we then went to Sharpness, the big docks. Industrial building there. Then we got too big, and we looked around for a new factory, and we couldn't find one. There isn't factories in the UK. There's thousands of warehouses. Factory.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
Well, they just have to be set up properly, and with the right. Basically, they need the right access. They need access for lorries to deliver big amounts of stuff, but in certain ways. And we knew exactly what we wanted. And in the end, we found it in Cheddar. But it was we took everything, the factory, all the people, everything. And we upped the whole lot and took it to Cheddar.
Wow. And how long have you been in Cheddar for now?
7 years.
Okay.
Where are you? You're at the back. Are you at the back behind?
It's the business.
The tap people.
It's the business part. It's opposite Vader.
Yeah.
Oh, tap people. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Just opposite them.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And funnily enough, and of course, over the years, I've
It's not going to look good on the camera.
No, well, it's you feeding me. You see. The worst thing is if you have sprinkles on cappuccino.
Oh yeah, I didn't do that.
No, that
I could have if you'd requested it.
So, and the funny thing is, over the years, I've read all sorts of books and autobiographies and this kind of thing, and I find, in general, that it's quite strange chances and things happen that set people on a particular path. And quite early on, I started making these wood coatings, which were in their infancy and seemed to be a very good idea at the time, but the technical problems were huge. And I exhibited the first things in, or I should say my wife and myself, and I get told off by the family all the time because I always say me, and really it's a family business and everyone has helped, so that's a bit naughty of me. So my wife and myself, we did a timber exhibition in London. This must have been about 86, 87. And a guy came onto our little stand and he said, yes, I'm from Thermatru, etc. And it turned out that he was from Bristol. And he had this warehouse in Bristol and he'd started to import fiberglass doors from the United States. They were very new. No one had seen them before. And it was a composite fiberglass skin with polyurethane in between, which made them very strong and very thermally efficient, of course. And when they produced the fiberglass skin, the press that produced it pressed the pattern of a wood grain into the surface.
Oh, I see.
So he said, well, that's very nice, he said, but it still doesn't look like a door. He said, so can you produce something that would make it look like a door? Well, it seemed to be easy. It took us 3 years.
Wow.
And that's not all the time. So, I mean, that's in between earning a living. And I produced this product, which we called liquid wood, which when it was lightly rubbed over the surface of these doors, made them look like wood. And we did extremely well with it. It really started to get us off the ground really well, although we never intended to be like that.
Yeah,
it was just chance that we haven't. But the biggest chance was that, like I said, we had these buildings in Rockhampton, and one day there was a knock on the door, and someone came and said, "There's a man at the door for you." So I said, "Oh, thank you." So I went to the door, opened the door, and in the car park was this large van that looked like wood. And I thought, that's quite interesting. So this guy came in and he said, "You make liquid wood, don't you?" I said, "How do you know?" "Oh," he said, I heard about it." He said, can you, because it was all wood colours, oak, mahogany, etc. So he said, "Can I have it in clear?" I said, "Why on earth?" He said, "Well, just can I?" I said, "Yes, if you like." So he said, "How much?" So I said, "Hang on." So I went and did a few calculations. I said, "So much a pot kind of thing." "Right," he said, "I'll have 50 of them or something." "Oh, right. Oh, good. I'll come and collect them at the end of the week." So he picked them up and disappeared. And then several weeks later, he came back again. And he said, "I'll have another 50 of those pots, you see." So I said, "What do you do?" So he said, "I do decorative paintwork." I said, "What, you paint?" He said, "Yes," he said, "but I do paintings on walls." Never heard of this. So I said, well, he said, "I paint wallpaper on walls."
Oh.
And I never heard of it. But in fact, it was huge, and it's still quite large. You can look at it all. It's all on the internet, and some amazing jobs done all over the world, where effects, marbles, wood grains, murals, all sorts of things are done. Mainly for people with lots of money, of course, because it's a very expensive thing to do. But they're done, and wood graining, of course, where you produce wood with paint. That's been around for several hundred years. And so he said, "I colour this up," he said, and I started to do my work with it, he said. So I said, "Well, what you used before?" Well, he said, "There's some really horrible solvent products on the market. And when you're working in small areas," he said, "they can be quite difficult to
They're
use."
not good for your health, are they?
No. So anyway, he showed me, he had these great big books because he'd just come back, again, funny enough, from the Middle East. And he'd just done a sheik's palace in
Wow.
Dubai or something and got an amazing amount of money. And he's the guy that told me, because he also told me about all sorts of things to do with all this art. He said, "Of course, I do gold leafing." I said, "Oh, I've heard of that." He said, "Yeah, so you stick gold onto things." And he told me that in the sheiks' palaces, they have to do all the tables and chairs in gold, but they have to do the underneath of the table. And he said, I asked this guy, he said, "Why do I have to do the underneath of the table?" And he said, "Well, if anything falls on the floor and someone goes down to pick it up, they'll look at the underneath of the table and see it's not gold." So he said it costs them twice as much that way.
Of course, yeah.
Anyway, so I said, "Oh, that's good." He said, I colour this stuff up with artist colours," he says, and do all my stuff. So I said, "Oh, good." So he said, why don't you sell it?" I said, well, I'm selling it to you. He said, you could do quite well with this. He said, I'll give you a list of people in London who bite your hand off if you took it up to them. So I said, right. So he gave me the list of where to go. So then we sat down and we said, well, what do we call it? I mean, what is it? What do we put it in? What do we do with it? So very, very quickly, we'd worked out. I still had lots of connections from my Feb days with people in Manchester that were involved in containers and this kind of thing. So I asked them for an unusual container, and they said, well, we got a square container that nobody wants. You can have that cheap. So I said, oh, we'll have that one then, which has now become what Polyvine is recognised for. If you go anywhere in the world and see Polyvine product, they're in square containers.
Oh, really? They're all in square.
We're the only people who would do it.
Yeah.
But again, it was pure chance. So we got that. So we need a label. And of course, this was before the days of modern electronic production and this kind of thing. So I found an artist in Thornbury who did artwork for a local magazine. He said, tell me what you want and I'll design you a label, you see. So we couldn't find anyone who'd print it, because in those days, they wanted like 50,000 labels to go on these big printing machines. So I was talking to the guy in the local stationery place who had a colour photocopier, which again was very unusual in those days. He said, I can buy crackback paper. He said, that's paper with sticky back. He said, and we can print this artwork onto those, and you can cut it up with a guillotine. So that's what we did, and the labels were kind of passable.
Wow.
You know, they were because in those days, nowadays we can't compete anywhere in the world without having incredibly good artwork, labels. But I mean, everyone would just laugh at you. But in those days, people were quite happy. They would accept that kind of thing. So anyway, that's what I did. And I went up to London in our little car. I went into the first of these places, and it was on the Edgware Road, on the corner of a side road on the Edgware Road, right at the bottom of the Edgware Road, right in the centre of London, called Simpson's. Again, they don't exist anymore. And I went through the door, and luckily this guy, Chris Moon, his name was, he lives in London now, but he used to live in Bristol, of all things, and he'd given me some sample sheets of work that he'd done with different things. So I took these with me, and I said to the guy, here's our little container, and here it is, you see, and it's £10 a pot or whatever it was in those days. So he said, just what we wanted. He said, I'll have 50. Well, I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was £500 or something.
Yeah, it was big.
A lot of money.
And that was the first order I got.
Wow.
And so I started pottering round, and very quickly, certainly within a few months, we had probably about 40 or 50 customers in London. I just concentrated on. I went up and down each day on the motorway. Got quite used to it in the end, and that was kind of the start. But my story goes on the fact that each little bit of it introduces something else. So what I hadn't realised was that, of course, London is the world's centre of decorative paint.
Yeah.
It was then. Now it's shifted to America, unfortunately, but then it was London. And people came from all over the world to speak to the right people and see the right places in London. So all of a sudden, it wasn't long, within a couple of years, we were starting to get inquiries from overseas. The first one was for Canada. And of course, the company phone rang in the house as well, because we had a house there in amongst these buildings. It was about 2:00 one morning, and the phone rang, and I picked it up and kind of said, "Yeah." And this American accent said, "Can I buy some of your scumble?" We called it scumble. Oh, sorry, I missed that bit out. So
Product.
No. So we had a meeting when he told us we had to sell this product. You see, because there were products to do it. You could make them from linseed oil and dryers and things, but there was no particularly proper product for it. And so several of us sat round talking about this thing for ages and ages. And someone said, I just looked it up in the dictionary, because of course you didn't have Google or anything in those days. And to make patterns with paint is called scumbling. So we said, well, let's call it scumble then. So that's what we called it, scumble. And since then, everyone that's copied us throughout the world has called it scumble.
Oh, have they?
So
You didn't patent it then? The name, you didn't patent the name?
We couldn't.
Really?
You can't register real names.
Really?
You can register
Your
a
own
particular
name?
design.
Right.
Or you can register a word that doesn't exist.
Okay.
So
Okay.
if you
If it's a name
changed
of
it,
something.
if you changed it to scruple or something,
Yeah.
then you could register it, but not that particular word.
Oh.
And so he said, I'm calling you from Toronto in Canada, and I want to buy some of your stuff. So I said, I'll send you a price list. You have to pay us up front,
Yeah.
and you have to pay us in pounds because we're not set up for it. So amazingly enough, of course, there was no fax machines or anything. I mean, we tend to forget how it was actually extremely difficult.
I can imagine.
So he said, well, I can't post an order to you. It'll take forever. So I said, well, as soon as you've got it, just ring me back, I said, and I'll write it down. All right, he said. So he wrote it down, and it was about £5,000.
Wow.
So we thought, so we went and had a celebration. So we thought, this is pretty good, really. So but again, we hadn't done anything. We hadn't exported. We hadn't packed export stuff. We had to get a pallet and pack it on pallets and all sorts of things.
It was all new to you.
Oh, everything was new. Yes, this was well. The thing was, you see, I've been involved in chemicals, and I've been involved in all these things, certainly with Feb for a long time, but not that part of it. I was just involved in the research and development.
It's that remote position, isn't it? You're almost overlooking it rather than actually doing the actual.
Oh, that's
yucky
right.
bit at the
That's
end,
right. Yes, yeah. So we had all this put up together. So then, of course, we had to get it on a lorry. Didn't have a forklift truck. So I went round the village, and I managed to get about 10 strong blokes, and we put holes through it and so forth
to get it on a lorry.
And we had steps, and we made these steps up. We lifted it step by step into the back of the lorry.
Love it.
And the other thing was our best one, I suppose, and I never got any pictures of it, which I was really disappointed on. The chemicals used to come, and the neighbours, this was a little farming community, the neighbours were not impressed. So these big chemical lorries used to arrive. Later on, as we got bigger, with big drums of chemicals on. But again, we didn't have a forklift. So we went round the farmers, and we got a load of big old tractor tires, and we made beds of them on the roadside. And when these lorries came up, we just used to push these drums off the lorry. They were round, luckily, and they bounced on the tires. And then once they came to a stop, two of us would then roll them down this grassy slope down to where we had the factory.
Needs must.
Oh. Well, I sometimes think we made more money when we didn't have all this equipment than we do now, but because we didn't have any overheads, of course. So anyway, we had it all ready. So my wife said, why don't we go with it? I said, what do you mean? So she said, well, this is going to go out. She said, I've done my research. Again, you couldn't do any research. I mean, we're so used to the internet. It's incredible. So she did her research, and she found that it would sail across the Atlantic, then through the St. Lawrence Seaway down to Lake Michigan, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Toronto.
Yep.
And then berth in Toronto. So she said it'll be in Toronto at the docks such and such a date.
How long would it take to get there? About 3 or 4 weeks?
Yeah, that's all. I think
Yeah.
4 weeks, a bit long. New York's pretty quick,
Yeah.
but to get through the seaway and everything. So so I said, well, can we afford to go to Canada? She said, well, it's a bit of an adventure. So I said, right, see what you can do. So anyway, a little while later, she came back and she said, I found a charter flight that's coming into Heathrow from India, Air India, and I can get us both on this charter flight for £100. It was something daft, you see. So I said, right, well, it's quite an adventure, the flight alone, because it was filled with all sorts of strange people and things, and smells of curry and so forth. And what we hadn't realised, of course, because you think to yourself, well, you should know all these things. So off we went to meet it. I have got pictures of us meeting it, actually. The lorry that took it from the docks to this
I
guy's
presume they had a
place.
forklift at the other end.
No, funny enough, at the other end we offloaded the pallet by hand.
Really?
So we just tore it to pieces, lifted the boxes up, and threw them down from the back of the lorry. Yes, yeah. Oh, yes. We didn't have any big. Well, it was quite a good customer, but anyway. We got there, and it was, I think it says in my diary, it was January the 20th, and it was like minus.
Very cold,
Whatever.
yeah.
Oh, unbelievably cold. And we found that to get on the buses or anything, because again we didn't have any money, so we couldn't take taxis or anything. And we got a bus from the airport to this fairly seedy hotel, a back street somewhere. But we found with the buses in Toronto, you go into a heated room kind of thing, and then there's these doors in the room, but the bus is like an aeroplane. The buses stop, and a little telescopic thing comes out, and you actually walk straight from this wall into the heated bus.
Oh,
very,
wow,
very
that's
clever. So off we went, took the thing and put it in his. The company was called Written Studios. They were an art and decorative paintwork company that were working all the way along Canada, Ottawa, Toronto, that kind of area of Canada, and they did a bit in distribution of things as well. So that's how we got started in Canada. And I'll come to the other bit in a minute, because Andre Rittins, who's still alive and is actually on the internet even now, he was born on a cargo ship in Hamburg Harbour. His parents had fled Latvia when the Russians marched in at the end of the Second World War, and he was born on this boat trying to get somewhere, which ended up in the UK.
Okay.
So him and his brother, who enters the story later, that's how they came. I think they were quite young. They were only like 2 or 3 years old, I think. And so they got to the UK. So that was Canada and Latvia started. All those come back into the story later on, because they're all, each little bit is the start of a branch of it all. So from there on, we have a slight pause. We did exhibitions in the UK, which were very successful. And then I bumped into a guy. I went to a little exhibition just to see what it was like in Belgium. And I bumped into this guy called Joris Arts, another fascinating character. And we got talking, and he said, I sell bits of paint, he said. I could sell your stuff in Belgium. So sure, of course you could. So that was the start of our depot in Belgium. but that took some time to get off the ground. And in the meantime, because I have all these strange ideas, I saw in a magazine that there was the World Hardware Fair, took place every year in Chicago, a place called the McCormack Center in Chicago. And so I said to my eldest son, I said, fancy a trip to Chicago?
Oh,
So, yeah, he said. So I said to my wife, I said, how cheaply can you get us both to Chicago? So again, she got a charter flight, Delta Airways, I think, which landed us somewhere outside of Chicago. And then we found we could get a train into Chicago. But of course, we had to set up a stand at this exhibition. So we sent to Canada. We sent all sorts of bits and pieces on the next delivery to Canada. We planned all this quite a long way in advance. And the guy in Canada said he'd drive down, because of course it just isn't that far to Chicago.
Of course.
He'd drive down to Chicago with all this stuff and help us with the exhibition.
Oh, fantastic.
So anyway, we set it all up. So the first morning, because again we had to use public transport, Andrew and I got to the exhibition really early. It started at 9 or something, but the only train we could get in from this cheap hotel, God knows where, it was right out in the country, was about 7:30 or something. So I said, look, there's these chuck wagons outside. So I said, we'll get a sausage sandwich or whatever they do, a beef burger, hamburger, and a drink, and we'll just go and sit on the stand. Because of course you didn't have your phone, you didn't have your phone to muck around with then. No entertainment. So we went in, sat down, had our stuff, you see, and we're thinking, what should we do with ourselves? And I could see from where I was sat on this stand, I could see it was all completely deserted. And I heard this kind of click clop of sounded like high heels, you see. What's that? And amazingly, down the aisle of this exhibition was this very nicely dressed lady was coming down the aisle. So I said to my son, I said, what's she doing? I said, there's nobody here. And she made straight for our stand.
Okay.
So onto the stand she came. So I said, can I help you? She said, I just want to look round, you see. So she looked round. She said, this is all very interesting. So I told her all about it. She said, this could be big. I said, I always hope it could be big. So she said, she said, I'll tell you what, I'd like to buy some of your stuff. Would you come and see me? So out of her bag, she produced this card. She was the chief buyer for Home Depot, which, as you know, is the largest DIY company in the world.
William's favourite shop.
Is it?
Is it?
He lives in Detroit. He's not here.
Right. It is a lot bigger now, of course.
Yeah,
I mean, we're looking now at kind of 30 years ago. But of course, this landed me with a huge dilemma. So I said, So I said, how we do anything? So she said, we'll have to come and see me. Can you come and see me next week? I said, I'm coming back to the UK. So she said, well, you can come back and see me, but I need to see you in the next several weeks. So I said, and of course you couldn't ring up anybody. I couldn't ring up my wife, and because in those days you couldn't make long distance phone calls. First of all, you couldn't find a phone. If you did it from a hotel, it would cost you like 50 quid to make a phone call. So
but it would have been. Surely that was a massive business opportunity. So spending £50 on a phone
doesn't work like that, Mike. You're looking at now rather than
of course,
then, because then it's
so £50 then would have been huge.
It's a massive amount of money, but also it's a huge risk.
Yes,
because there's no guarantees that you're going to get any business out of it. But also, it's like I've got to find that money, and I've still got to pay wages, and I've still got to do this, and I've still got to do that.
It's very
and
true.
how am I going to afford to come back and see this woman who wants to? It's that whole business, isn't it? I know exactly how you're thinking. Because he's not even born by this time.
Of course, you didn't have credit cards or anything. You could get traveller's checks, and you would go to a bank and check and cash them.
Right.
But that's all you could do. And anyway, in the end, we agreed that I'd see her in 4 weeks' time. So when I got back to the UK, I had to get my wife to. So I had to go.
No cheap flight.
Well, I had to go by myself because we couldn't afford for more than one person to go.
It's funny how you say that, though, because, sorry, just bringing it into today, because obviously, I've got my own business and so is Mike. But for me, and I see the difference between my thinking and Mike's thinking. I do some mentoring with Mike and we talk about this, don't we? And stuff. So for me, I think about the final purse because that's the way you just do. You're not, I'm not frivolous in any way, shape or form. I'm really careful because I think like tomorrow, the wages come out. And I've got to make sure that I've got enough for cash flow and and I don't guarantee anything. So I always make sure there's always something there to cover that. Whereas I think a lot of the younger generation today who have their own businesses don't always think like that. I think we think like that because we're of that generation.
Oh, that's right. I mean, really, you shouldn't. The others will tell you. With me, I'm afraid I'm a lost soul now. I'm afraid social media and
You're on
entrepreneurs and all this kind of thing have gone completely beyond me. I can't understand it. And the fact that you pick up the newspapers or you look at these things every day and you see Mrs. Bloggs has just made £10 million by inventing a new cake on her kitchen table. I mean, it's absolute utter rubbish. And people like ourselves that have spent 30 or 40 years building, and all right, yes, we're well off and we've got a big business now, but it takes years and years, and you can't just find the business. But the trouble is nowadays is what they do is they borrow the money.
Yeah.
And they go to these venture capital people who say, yes, for 50% of your company, I'll give you £1 million or something. But that wasn't possible years ago. And maybe you didn't want to give away your company. But
isn't that the same as what you were saying right at the very beginning of this about having somebody come in and do your website, and you've got these, you wouldn't be doing it like this, you'd have the professionals in and they come and do this wonderful picture of you or whoever it is going to be, and it's exactly the same, isn't it? That concept is it's not you that they're filming anymore, it's some random person that was brought in because they're better looking than you or slimmer or taller or whatever it is, and there's a concept that they're selling rather than you as an individual. And I think we've lost that a little bit. I mean, I do social media because I have
and Peter does do social media. You're an avid Facebook fan, aren't you?
I do. Oh no, don't get me wrong. There are parts of it which I think are quite progressive and good. There are other parts which I think are absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I suspect you can't have one without the other. You can't grab the good bits and chuck the bad bits out.
I think you're absolutely right. So I wanted to ask a few questions. I know you're sort of telling us your story.
Oh no, don't worry.
I'm conscious of time, and I think it'd be great to continue the story on another podcast.
It definitely
part two. I'm quite happy
we'd love to do
I think
that.
part two would be really exciting. But I guess what I'd like to know is in the period that you've talked about, so I think from the 70s to I think late 80s, I think you've sort of covered. What was the biggest challenge for you as a person in that period of time? Obviously, the financial bit that you talked about and all of that has obviously been a struggle, but that's quite common in business.
It is, and funnily enough, I've never really thought about it.
That's why I've asked the question.
My wife and myself have just done it. But remember that I started off selling things at school. You'll find this if you read the history of people like myself, other people. I don't know what it is. It's just you're made like that.
Mm-hmm.
I sold stuff at school. Then I sold stuff on market stalls after I left school.
Oh, wow.
And then my wife and myself built up a builder's merchants business in Gloucestershire for about 6-7 years, and then we sold it. So we had all these various things building up. And
so you really are an entrepreneur then?
Now you see, you come to a bit which I'm particularly annoyed about. If you read the proper explanation of an entrepreneur, 99% of people aren't.
Mm-hmm.
And what's happened, especially in America, is entrepreneur is now used for anybody. Anybody. If you have a shop and sell pet food, you're an entrepreneur. No, not really. Not the original meaning
So
of
what
the
is
word, anyway.
what is your interpretation of what an entrepreneur is?
Well, as I understand it,
Yeah.
the explanation in the business journals is somebody who, first of all, comes up with something either unique or extremely unusual that nobody else does. So that makes them really unusual at the top of the pile to start with. Then they transfer that into some kind of company which generates money and which has titles, and then they employ people and pay their wages and so forth. And that progression is somebody who is building a business, basically. But unfortunately, somebody who I shouldn't have picked one, I suppose, was kicking a cake. It's very male chauvinist. But you pick nowadays virtually anybody that starts a business doing anything, and most of it is bringing stuff in from China and selling it out of their back door. That to me isn't an entrepreneur. That's just a business person, and people have been doing it forever. Business people, but
yeah, and I agree with you, and I hear what you're saying about that, and I think I suppose it's like in life about most things. It's about how you interpret things, isn't it? It's how you interpret things and how Mike interprets things. Rob works with me at work, so that's right. And Rob and Mike and I spend quite a bit of time together. So that's like how Mike interprets and how I interpret, and we can all have different positions on that. But funnily enough, I was talking to a business person the other day, and they were talking about entrepreneurial tax, and like the taxman's interpretation of entrepreneurial tax is that, like you were saying, is you get a tax advantage if you're going to sell your business, obviously, if you've developed that from nothing, if you see what I'm saying. So I suppose so that contradicts in a sense what you're saying, but it also then, is it about ideas? Is it about, because I would not call myself an entrepreneur at all. I would not see myself in that position. What I would see myself is somebody like yourself that's always had ideas, that's always worked. I mean, I've worked since I was 13, virtually full time. And here, there, and everywhere, doing every market. So, I could read. Right, you and I are quite parallel in that sense. And if I needed money, I went out and earned it. You know what I'm saying? Until I could afford to actually have my own company. And even when I had my own company, I still worked for other people. And anything to kind of keep everything going in the right direction. And I still do that now to a certain degree. But and I think that's the thing, isn't it? People's concept of the world is very different. It's just having an understanding of what that person's concept is really important. So when somebody says to you, liquid wood, well, I'm just thinking, how the bloody hell do you get the grains in? This is what's going on in my head. And until I get into your frame of reference about what that means, and I have an understanding, I won't know that. Does that make sense? Just like what Mike's interpretation of what an entrepreneur is, maybe is completely different to perhaps ours. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. No, I agree. And I think everyone's view is slightly different. In my head, an entrepreneur is somebody that has done something that is above the norm. So, opening your own hairdressers, as an example, is fairly common. If you open your own hairdressers and, almost within the first year, you've quadrupled in size, you 10x'd it. Actually, I see that as a bit of an entrepreneur. It's someone that's really been driven, really grown that business at such an extreme speed and extreme volume. I think that's where that comes from. I would classify Peter as an entrepreneur because you're clearly also an inventor. I don't know if you would use that term yourself, but it sounds like you've invented products. Would you call yourself an inventor?
Oh, yes. I mean, again, funnily enough, this all comes back to, it's strange when you look back, because it all comes back to, when I was very young, I used to make things out of things, and I had a little toolkits, and I used to make all sorts of things. And it's obviously the way your brain is formed, because it seems to be quite unusual. And it's just the fact that in the end you have to become quite disciplined, because you have to make sure that you're pushing this in a very specific direction. Otherwise, you wander off all over the place.
You do, yeah. No, that's very, very true.
So you talked about you've touched on your family, and and I also do that. And I have to check myself because I'm married and I have a wonderful, supportive husband. And if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't be where we are today. But so what does your family consist of now? So is your wife still with us? Is she?
Oh yes, yes. I mean, we're now the third generation at Polyvine, so the grandchildren work in the company. So myself and my wife, although I'm meant to be retired, but they can't keep me away, actually, which I'll make a bit of a nuisance of myself. But I still like it, actually. But yes, there's the three generations. And it was funny, really, because I've wander off, but we all have our own things in life, I suppose. And many, many years ago, I buy second-hand books. I love reading. I buy second-hand books. And I bought a book. It was Seven Pillars of Wisdom by Lawrence,
Yeah.
which was really not actually part of the story. But I opened it, and on the flyleaf, someone had written something. And I have never seen this written anywhere else. And I learnt it, and it was, "We live again through our children and our children's children, and we can touch the future with our children's hands. Immortality."
Wow.
And so I remembered that all my life. And now I'm teaching my grandchildren what I know. And I know that if they then teach their children and grandchildren, I'm actually carrying myself forward.
You are.
I think I did this because my father, who was quite a nice man, never did anything. He inherited a bit of money when he was young, and he spent his life not doing anything. Well, I know he worked, but I mean, no accomplishments at all. He started off as a clerk and ended up as a clerk. And when he died and we buried him, I thought, well, there is nothing to say that he's existed at all.
Well, there is. I'm going to challenge you about that.
Because there's me, I suppose.
You, yeah, and he's obviously given you support and integrity and kindness and manners and all of that stuff. You can see your personality shines through just by spending a very short period of time with you. I can feel it from you. And he must have had some, even if an opposite, he must have had some influence over you. And I think sometimes we forget that.
Oh yes, but so what I meant it wasn't from that point of view. It was from the point of view that there's not going to be. I said to the family, when I die, I want a mausoleum. Unfortunately, you can't have a mausoleum in this country, and I want them to make a Polyvine bottle out of marble and put it on the top of my mausoleum, and then I'll be remembered for all time. I suspect that will happen.
But won't you be remembered for all time because of your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, your great-great-grandchildren?
No, you can very soon be forgotten.
I doubt it.
I mean, my grandchildren know nothing about my father at all. They never met him. I think they might have seen them. I think they just saw. No, they didn't. No, they saw my grandmother when they were kind of a year old or something before she died, but they don't know them at all.
But they know you.
Oh, they know me. Yes, yes. And I have done the family tree, so they have got that advantage.
Yeah. But coming back to that, how do we define what success is? Because I think your definition of success, my definition of success, and Mike's might be completely different.
Oh, my definition of success is a whole combination of things. It isn't necessarily business in total. It's the fact that really, if you have lots, millions of people do it across the world, but if you have a reasonably happy family and you've built something up, that's really. I always think to myself, if I drop dead tomorrow, I think I've probably accomplished 3 lifetimes worth of things in my life. So it wouldn't worry me in the slightest, because I couldn't go and say, oh, well, I haven't done anything or whatever. And there's an awful lot been left behind. So, yes. And it might very well be that if someone has a podcast in 50 years' time, it's become international, and people talk about it all over the world. You never know.
No, you don't. Absolutely do not. What would yours be?
I don't know, really. I think it's just about being happy, to be honest. And that can be in all walks of life. That can be family, friendships, in business. As long as you're happy, I think that's kind of the most important thing.
Well, funnily enough, I was saying that I read all these things, and back when I first started with Feb, I think it was, I was under a Jewish gentleman called, his name's gone, come back to me in a minute, Goring, Dennis Goring, an amazing personality. And when I met him, he said, I have a little present for you, Peter. This was when I started working with him. And he gave me this little parcel, and inside was a book, 40 pages long, called Who Moved My Cheese. It's world famous, and it's by one of the most famous American psychiatrists.
Spencer.
You might have read it, have you?
Dr.
I don't know.
Spencer.
Yeah, I think we've probably both read it, actually.
Yeah. And that set me on my course, and I realized that the moral of that story was, because for the people who are listening who don't know the story, it was just about several mice who every day went and got their cheese, and one day the cheese wasn't there, and the only mouse that survived was the one who'd been really adventurous and found out other things. And the moral of the story to me was that everyone has a comfort zone, and most people try and get to it, and when they've got to it, that's it.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm happy. I got my comfort zone. Unfortunately for me, and my wife got absolutely startled, is whenever I get to a comfort zone, I immediately go and do something completely different and muck it all up, on the basis that I think to myself, well, it's the only way you can keep yourself active all the time.
I agree. I'm the same. And it's to my husband does the same with me. He goes, can't you just retire, or just rest, or just do this, or just do that? Why can't you be a normal person? So it's like when we set up the rehab, by the way, Who Moved My Cheese? Spencer Johnson is written by, and it's a book that we recommend all of our clients. Every single person who go to somewhere house, the rehab, gets suggested that read. And in fact, anybody that I see either mentoring or in my one-to-one work that I do privately, anything else like that, that's the first book I recommend people to read. And The Present by him as well. That's a good one. But there's that bit where I should be retiring. I should be I'm at that age now. Do you know what I mean? When I should be thinking about stopping, and actually I'm thinking about saying, I don't just want to open a rehab. I then want to help everybody in the community, which is why we set up a charity. And then I don't just want to do that. I want to go and do that for that person. Oh, I could go and do that for them. And actually, the Waffle Cafe's just opened in Bridgewater. I don't know. Do you know what I'm saying? It's that constant. But I think that's when you're that kind of person, which you sound that you're very similar to that. There's always something to work towards, in a sense. Do you die if you don't work towards something? Is there part of you that...
There's always that challenge, isn't it? And it's about challenging yourself, I think.
Well, it is as well, I think, about, because I know you're connected somewhat with mental health and things, but I do tend to think there's all sorts of things, whether it's food, the way you live, the people you're associated with. There's all sorts of things which will change your life.
Yeah.
And if you can try and do the right bits of them, you can stay away from, because I think we all get depressed, especially when you're running businesses and things. I can remember once my wife and myself, we spent several weeks living on cans of baked beans because we just run out of money, and we had toast and baked beans. It was pretty horrible for a while, but we survived all right, because we were both in the same boat, and there was light at the end of the tunnel. So but I can also appreciate that's a bit light-hearted, because I know a lot of people have far worse things happen to them than that. But yeah, I think there is there is a whole way of living which can help you.
But isn't it getting over your adversities? Whatever comes your way is looking for a way out or a different way of approaching it. You can't change what's happened. But you can change how you view it or how you deal with it or how your future.
I think the big difficulty is if you're someone like me, because I know I have a reason about self-confidence, and that's because I went to a self-confidence school, as it were, where they actually teach you self-confidence, these kind of schools. But I've always been completely confident that whatever happens, I can make money.
Yeah.
And I've gone off and sold things. I've done all sorts of things, and but I can do it. Yeah. Now so it's all very nice for me to say that. If I couldn't do these things, it wouldn't be the same.
How would you
really.
feel?
That's the trouble.
No, I understand. I completely understand.
Well, shall we end it there?
Good.
And we'll book you in for a part 2.
You want parts? Well, you can have. I can tell you that. Well, as you probably know, my youngest son Ian decided I had to record my life story, so he brought this guy along with recording equipment, and I talked for 3 days.
We're not going to let you talk for 3 days.
You're not having 3 days.
We can do 3
come
podcasts.
Come back. But thank you so much.
Oh, no, he's joking.
Yeah.
Thank you, Peter.
No,
thank you.
It's been great.
You've been a
and
really good friend.
We'll have you back soon.
Sorry.
Thank you.
No problem.
For your time.